The publisher was circling now that he had come to the end of his book deal, concerned they could no longer afford to pay him what he would doubtlessly demand of his next contract. He was speaking at the annual sales conference, joining the publishing team's table for dinner. Grace, only 22, and an assistant cookbook editor, was stunned she'd been asked to join the table, more so when she discovered she was seated to the right of Ted Chapman. Assistant cookbook editor wasn't nearly as glamorous a job as it sounded, and it was unusual for a lowly assistant to go to the sales conference. But her boss had demanded, and when her boss made demands, she had no choice. Perhaps he understood these were the perks that made the job worthwhile. Going to publishing dinners, meeting famous chefs, Jacques Pepin and Julia Child. She met them, and they talked to her as if she were an equal. Those perks made it all worthwhile. Ted Chapman was not often seen in the office, and when he was, he seemed frightening. Dark and brooding, he had the kind of aura that made you want to stare, made you want to please him. Grace had arrived early to the dinner, had allayed her fears during the cocktail hour with 2 glasses of cheap white wine, and by the time they took their seats in the banquet hall next door, her fear of Ted Chapman was tinged with intrigue. She sat shaking at the table, wondering why she had been given such an onerous and terrifying seat. "Gracie will charm him." Grace looked up to see Bill Knight, the publisher, toasting her across the table with a wink. "Right, Gracie?" Of course, thought Grace. How could he even think of leaving when we have such talented and delightful people working for us? Grace forced a smile, feeling sick. She was here as bait, and there was no way to leave. She would have to do her job, charm Ted Chapman, and then perhaps, certainly, look for another job. Ted was the only empty chair at the table. He was too nervous before public speaking to sit at a table with other people, explained his editor. He needed quiet, but would join afterwards. Oh, God, thought Grace, her heart sinking. How pretentious. The excitement of meeting him was beginning to pall, the whole evening starting to feel like a huge mistake. How ironic, she thought, that this morning she flew around her apartment, trying on dresses, tipping her makeup into her purse so she could get ready for this event, exhilarated at meeting someone whose work she adored. Now she would have given anything to get out of there. Grace had no appetite, unusual for her. She was a cookbook editor because she loved food. Coming to New York, she was amazed at how few girls her age knew how to cook. She learned to cook at university, going home to her roommate Catherine's house, where her roommate's mother, Lydia, was so thrilled to have an eager student, she sat her at the kitchen table for hours and taught her everything she knew. Grace loved creating, loved cooking, and loved writing. What better place to put all those skills together than working for a publisher in the cookbooks division? And where more glamorous than New York? She hosted impromptu dinner parties all the time. 2 folding card tables, one she had, one she found on a street corner one afternoon, served as the dining table, with long wooden benches that had been made out of planks of oak by a handy ex-boyfriend. Grace would throw burlap over the tables, fill mason jars with flowers, and line them down the center. The food was inexpensive, and back then, in those early days in New York, frequently had an English bent. Her co-workers delightedly cooed over Toad in the Hole and Treacle Tart as Grace dreamed of one day writing a cookbook of her own. At the event